a couple of things to consider when watching this. What is my experience of the Altravesur? And the first one is that I was a solo female rider. I am a bit of a weirdo magnet, so at all times I'm doing my best to avoid attracting any male or weirdo attention. As it turns out, my worst enemy was myself. And another is that I was on no time limit at all. I'd fully intended from day one to ride slowly, to savour the views, savour the mountains, enjoy the pueblos, get a hotel or hostel if I felt like it. You may not have that luxury, and therefore you'll probably be riding lighter, you'll probably be doing longer days, harder days, you may be stealth camping. I'm not a fan of stealth camping. Setting up and packing up in the dark isn't for me. I like to chill at camp. So there may be some differences you need to think about. A very important part of planning your bike packing tour is deciding when to go. Spain isn't always sunny. It can be rainy, it can rain for days, it can rain for weeks. It might be snowy, it might be icy, it could be 40 degrees. You really need to do your research. I didn't research the weather enough. When I went in the springtime, I left Cadiz on the 20th of March. I was caught out by the Levante wind. So it didn't matter to me. I had all the time in the world. But if I was on a limited length trip, it would have really spoilt my trip. So investigating the weather and doing your research is really important. A couple of apps I used whilst I was travelling. I used El Tiempo for the daily weather. It was reasonably accurate, even in the mountains. And another one which was really important on the Cadiz coast was an app called Windy. And it was very good at predicting the winds. The Levante wind blows in Spain twice a year. It can be for up to 10 days at a time and can be around 60 knots or more or less. So it's definitely worth working out or finding out when the winds are due to be blowing. Another thing to think about when you're planning when to go is that the Spanish are very keen on their fiestas, and at the time of fiestas the hotels and hostels can get booked very quickly, so it's worth checking out when they are. Another thing to check out or consider is that when you're going, everywhere might not be open. For example, in the springtime all the campsites weren't open, nor were all the restaurants, so that's worth considering too. Anyway, enough of my waffle, let's get on with this review. This is the full Altravesur route. What I've done here is I've imported the GPX file from BIKEPACKING.com and I've imported it into Google Maps. The route starts here in Cadiz on the south coast on the Atlantic, and it ends up here in Valencia in the Mediterranean coast. Unfortunately, I only got to around here, halfway across the Sierra de Cazorla. So the route begins in the San Fernando district of Cadiz, here in Calle Real. We ride out of town and then across
a camino alongside some wetland, and you soon hit the town of Chiclana de la Frontera. I actually camped there. There's a campsite called La Rana Verde here. Has all the usual facilities. It was only about £8 a night. Leaving Chiclana, there's a lot of urban riding on surfaced roads through urbanisations and bike golf courses. There is an opportunity to ride a bit of a single track alongside one of the roads here for a short while, which breaks up the monotony. And you continue on. Now, just before the urbanisation of Roche, there's a turn in to your right that leads to a bit of a walk-in area. It's some sort of parkland, and I think you could find somewhere to wild camp here. I don't know about the legalities, but I'm sure there would be a wild camping opportunity there. I've no idea about a water opportunity though. You continue on the road into the urbanisation of Roche and ride through it. I actually diverted as close to the beach as I could, so I got some views. And as you leave the urbanisation, you cross the sand on a nice wooden walkway, which is quite fun. And then when it ends, you're riding a nice cliff top path all the way to Porto de Canil, which is here. And here is a restaurant if you wanted to get something to eat or top up your water. Then there's some riding across tree-planted sand dunes. I got quite lost here and wasted hours, and so I decided to camp in Conil de la Frontera, which is here. Camping Eucalyptus was closed, so I camped at Camping La Rosaleda. Excellent campsite. It was about £13 a night, and it has got top facilities. It has a shop, laundry, etc., but very clean, very nice, well equipped. Riding out through Conil de la Frontera, through the urban areas again, you cross this brushland, this scrubland. There's a landmark here, Torre de Castelnovo. Here it's somewhere to shelter from the wind if it's windy. And then you have to ride onto the beach because the water looks like it's a river flowing to the sea, but it actually stops. So you have to walk onto the beach and around it. I don't know if it always stops or whether at some points it's flowing into the sea and you can't cross it. You'd have to go another way around. Then you ride a pretty surface pathway along the beach. To your left are cafes, bars, restaurants and surf shops and surf schools. Not all were open in March. Very pretty though. And then you ride onto the beach. Now, I couldn't ride my bike. It was too heavy. It sunk in the sand and there was about a 40-knot headwind. So I rode to about here and then I got off and went across the fields into Zahora. So I can't say what the rest of this sandy riding is like. But in Zahora, I again camped at a campsite, Camping Pinar San Jose. Again, it had full facilities and was quite nice. Riding out on the road, you come to Los Canos de Meca. Once you've ridden through the village, where I presume there are shops and resupply facilities and water facilities, you ride out by turning right into this parkland, and it's a preservation area. It's wooded sand dunes, and the sand is quite deep and there's lots of tree roots across the pathway. I don't think you could ride it. It's a bit of a hiker bike because it's all uphill as well, which you can't see on here, and it remains uphill until about here, and then it's rideable. The sand is less deep, so you can ride it. And there's a landmark here, Torre de Tajo, You can have a sit and look at the views from the cliff top. All very pretty. And then riding out, it eventually becomes a surfaced camino, and that leads all the way to Bavate. Due to the Levante wind, I ended up staying in Bavate for I think just over a week, and I checked into Hostal Bavate just here. It was really nice, bike friendly, only €20 a night. They've got a fantastic tapas bar that's very popular with all the locals, and I enjoyed my week in Bavate, waiting out the wind. So you ride out of Bavate town over a large bridge along this road, and then there's a turn off onto a trail here. Now for some reason I missed that, or I couldn't get onto it. This is all military land and I couldn't find a way onto it, I seem to remember. So I took this road, it's only a small section, and joined back up with the route here. You then pass through what is a holiday town of Sierra de Cazorla. It seems to be lots of villas and hotels and apartments. I'm guessing there's restaurants there. I don't know about shops. And you continue right through the town on the surface road. It does show a campsite here, but I don't know if it's open. So you continue on. You do actually ride on the surface road through some urbanisations, eventually arriving at this lighthouse, Faro de Camarinal. It's a very pretty spot from the cliff top, very nice lighthouse. And to the left of the lighthouse, you get onto the Parque Natural Estrecho. And this is an undulating, sometimes wooded camino. It's roughly surfaced, but it's not too bad at all. It does get steep at one point, but not horrendously. And eventually it goes off into farmland. And if you wanted to wild camp, I'd say wild camp somewhere around here in the farmland, because once you get to here, you turn right at this Cortico, there's a wind farm and everywhere is fenced off. So you're riding a camino, but there's a fence either side of you, so there's no real wild camping opportunities. I didn't notice any water opportunities along here. Do a small stretch of the road here and then bypass the village of Facinas. I'm sure there'll be resupply opportunities there. But on this walkway, so to the left of the road, is a walking path. And I rode along that, and there's two fuentes. Unfortunately, they're only 1 or 2 kilometres apart, but there is water opportunities there. So continuing on the walk path, there is actually along here somewhere, here, a recreation area. Now there was a cafe and a piece of land with picnic tables and chairs. And if you were brave, you could wild camp there. I'm pretty sure you could stealth camp there. And then you turn off onto this camino. And you continue all the way along it. Now, if you wanted to camp by the lake, you need to turn off here and get off the Altravesur route. I didn't. I continued on up this hill and to the lake. It's all fenced off and all the surrounding land was filled with cows and calves. So I decided to wild camp somewhere around here on the side of the Camino. And this is called the Camino de Ojen. I didn't get disturbed. Obviously for water, you've got the lake if you need it. Continuing on the Camino, it's a very well surfaced one through wooded land. I didn't notice any water opportunities, but then I wasn't looking because I had plenty. and that goes on for some time. There was what looked like a tea house along the route, but it was actually closed, but maybe open at other times of the year. And eventually you hit a main road, and here is a Repsol filling station, and it has all the facilities you could want. It's got a cafe, car wash, you can get water. They let me use the electricity in the restaurant, so that was really handy. And as it had been a thunderstorm the night before and raining all day, I diverted off route and went into Los Barrios. And here I checked into Hotel Real, again bike friendly. It was €27 a night. And also in Los Barrios there's a fantastic bike shop called Run Bike, which is here. And Salva, the guy that runs it, was so very helpful and friendly. And so I highly recommend that bike shop. And they had a tinker with Bay. I rejoined the route from Los Barrios, returning to the Parque Natural El Conocales, and it's an undulating, pretty camino, reasonably well surfaced, a little bit muddy in places. And then eventually you come to a road where you get onto, it's a cycle path that runs alongside a road. And eventually you hit this pueblo, and there's a roundabout, and I'm not sure I took the correct route from here. I took a surfaced mountain road. It was a long, long haul, all uphill, and I could see the embalser to my left, and I was expecting to be closer to it because I've seen people camping by it before. Now, possibly I took the wrong road, but I ended up at the top here, which is where the route comes, and it's a tourist area. There's a castle and a kiosk, so if you wanted to resupply up here, it looks like there may be some places to stay. I don't know about wild camping through this area because I wasn't looking for anywhere. And I continued on from this tourist area on the GR7, and it rides along a camino, quite rocky at times, and then it heads into farmland. It can be very boggy if it's been raining, especially riding along these fields. Sometimes you had to ride across a ploughed field, muddy and boggy and puddly, and the camino isn't a surface camino, it's more sort of muddy and grassy. And eventually you turn left and ride along a railway, and there wasn't many opportunities for wild camping along here because it was so wet. All these fields they weren't just muddy, there was lying water because it had rained so much. There was a small piece of pine woodland here which you could camp in, but the ground was a bit bumpy for my liking, so I continued on and I camped perhaps here. I think it may have been here where I camped, and running down the back here is a river. The water is quite muddy, so you really do need a filter. As for water opportunities, the river's never far away, but there is a couple of river crossings. One has a bridge and one doesn't, but it's only shallow. Well, it was shallow when I was there in springtime, so you can get water. One thing that it's important to know that I do is filter all my water. So when I say there's a water opportunity, I mean to filter, then drink. I did take it from the odd high mountain fuente without filtering, but really I shouldn't have done, because I saw a cowpat on a mountain stream quite high up. So filter all of your water. A Sawyer filter is about 40 quid. The Camino takes you through more farmland and then straight through the town of Jimena de la Frontera. Now, because it was going to rain for a week nearly, I rented a Cortico, Casa de Luna, luckily, and I stayed in Jimena for about 6 nights, I think it was. There are lots of supermarkets and shops. There isn't a ferreteria, but there is a construction shop that has all the usual hardware in it, and including gas. Now, one thing I haven't mentioned is that often these towns have what the Spanish know as a bazaar, and it's very much like our English pound shop or bargain shop. And these shops can be a lifesaver if you need something that isn't going to be in a supermarket. So even the smallest towns can have one of these bazaars. So have a look out for those if you're stuck for something. On leaving Jimena, because of all the rain and because I hadn't allowed any dry-in time, I didn't take the Camino. So this stretch of the Camino I missed out. I took one of these roads, the surfaced road. I'm not sure if it was this one or this one. I'm pretty sure I come down here, so it's probably this one. And then I rejoined the Altravesur route by turning right onto Camino just here. And just here you come out of the Cadiz province and you're into the Malaga province. It was very pretty woodland, and there was at one point a fuente with a tap. I didn't try it because I didn't need water, but I'm presuming it worked. It looked as though it was wet around there. So there may be a water opportunity, and there was certainly some fabulous wild camping opportunities in this area. On arriving at Ubrique, I don't know if I was just being a dipstick, but I couldn't find anywhere to stay. There was no wild camping when I was ready to camp, and I couldn't find a hostel or hotel, and I met a family who let me sleep in their casita de campo for the night. Full resupply facilities in Ubrique. It's a lovely town, lots of facilities, lovely mountain town. And then riding back out, all this stretch is a very rocky uphill Roman road. Probably my least favourite part, because, well, I certainly couldn't ride it, couldn't even imagine riding it. Eventually you come out onto a road, a surfaced road here at the village of Benayocath. I didn't go into the village, but presume there's some resupply facility. I rode the surfaced road out, and I'm pretty sure there was a fuente. I think there was a fuente somewhere around here, and I rode along the road. There's a small section off-road, but I didn't bother with it because it was so small and it was just rough grassland alongside the road. So arriving at Villa Luenga del Rosario, I got another hotel for the night here. It was this one, Hotel La Posada. It was about €35 for a night, very nice and bike friendly. And continuing on, you ride through the town and straight onto the Camino. And it's a well-surfaced Camino through sometimes wooded land, sometimes farmland. The woodland was very pretty. The farmland was very boggy, undulating and boggy, with lots of little streams running across it and big puddles. So the rain had obviously just soaked the soil and it wasn't draining through. And this is the Sierra de Cazorla. And when you get to the end of this section of the Sierra de Cazorla, just here on your left is a restaurant. So good chance to get something to eat. And then you turn right onto the road and then should be able to get back onto the Sierra de Cazorla here. Now, I wasn't able to. A man had told me that I couldn't ride on it, and I don't know if that was true or he was just having me on. And then further along there were some gates, but they were too high to get over. So now heading for Ronda, I had to take this surfaced road instead of riding on the Sierra de Cazorla. And as I arrived at Ronda, there was a piece of sort of parkland, sort of wooded area, and I set up wild camp here. It was somewhere around here I wild camped, reasonably close to houses, but it was fine. There was a few walkers and a couple of teenagers gave me some stick, but that's where I stayed for the night. And then the next day I headed into Ronda itself, and I met up with someone I'd been talking to on a bikepacking forum, and she told me about a hostel, so I rode to the hostel. It was full, and I ended up going into the town and booking into Hotel Ronda. I was lucky to get the room because it was the week before Easter and the town was rammed with people who'd returned home for the fiestas. They were bike friendly, really nice staff, and I think it was around €40 a night, but I enjoyed my time there. On leaving Ronda, you then get onto the Camino, and you're crossing the Sierra de Nieves all across here. First of all, it's farmland and then it's hills. Now there's a sticky point here. I got lost for ages. I actually went through a gate somewhere near the Cortico, and then the farmer was telling me where to go, but I couldn't find it, and it was somewhere over here. There's another gate. Now I saw another bunch of mountain bikers, and I'm pretty sure there's a GR signpost here, and I think there's a gate, and I'm pretty sure they went through this gate and then straight through the field. So if you're getting lost, I think you can just go straight through here, which then crosses this field. I think there's another gate there, and then it leads you onto this single track. It's a great bit of single track. It can be rocky, and there's some shale fall. It's right on the edge of a large drop here, but it's really good fun. And then it gets twisty and steep here, very steep. Pay attention to the GR signposts. I got horribly lost, so keep your eye out for them. If they've got a cross on them, that's not the way to go. So you wind your way to here, turn left onto the Camino, and along this Camino is a water opportunity. There's a fuente, and ride all the way to El Borgo. There really wasn't any wild camping opportunities that I saw on this Camino, by the way. It's a incline up one side and a drop down the other, so it's just a bare Camino. The land starts to flatten out a bit around here, so between here and El Borgo you may find a wild camping spot, but there are a lot of corticos about. In El Borgo there's limited accommodation, so I'd book up if you're planning to stay there. I think there are shops, but I didn't use them. I stopped at the restaurant Casa Pepe for some food. It was very good, but I had a bit of a saga there. And then riding out of the town back onto the Camino, I wild camped somewhere around here for the night. And the Camino runs through farmland. It's just undulating hills. You ride through farmland, then it becomes wooded. I'd say that probably there's wild camping opportunities all the way up through to the woodland, and then the Camino becomes quite tight and twisty downhill. It's really nice, good views, and quite an exciting ride down. I didn't spot any water opportunities, but then I wasn't looking. But as you get to Ardeles, you cross the river on the bridge, so you could probably get water there. I booked a room at Hostal El Cruce for a night. They were booked the rest of the week because of fiestas. There are shops, so you could resupply. The hostel was around €34 and they're bike friendly. Leaving Ardeles, you get straight onto the Camino. It's uphill for quite some time, and then the Camino becomes undulating, and it can be steep. Can be quite steep up and down. Quite nice, quite enjoyable, some brilliant views, and I think you'll find plenty of wild camping through here. I didn't spot any water opportunities, but then again, I wasn't looking. Eventually the Camino becomes a surfaced road, and you ride that surfaced road until a sharp right-hand hairpin. So when you get to this hairpin, you cross the road and go into some woodland, and the woodland skirts around this reservoir. It's possible you could wild camp in here if you needed to, and eventually the trail becomes a mule trail. It's steep and gnarly all the way down to El Chorro. There's a bit of road section here and a bridge to cross the reservoir. There is a cafe here, a train station if you wanted to bail, a little kiosk, and there is an expensive hotel as well if you did need a hotel. Leaving El Chorro, you ride up above the pueblo onto a Camino, first riding through wooded land. You may find a wild camp opportunity, but it was a thunderstorm when I was there, so there was no chance. When you get out into the farmland area, you'll find a fence to your right most of the time and steep, gnarly land to your left. Again, there are a few wild camp opportunities. I think there was some ruins, and also there was a car park somewhere. Now, somewhere along here, if it's been raining, the ground becomes clay-like and you can't ride your bike over it, you'll need to carry it. Eventually the Camino becomes surfaced, and it's a downhill ride all the way into Valle de Abdelaziz. Because it was torrential rain when I got there, I sought out this hostel. It was full because of fiestas, but the very kind man arranged me a room at Refugio de Alamut, just outside the town. It was €35 a night, bike friendly, very nice people, nice facilities, and I stayed there for a week waiting out the rain. When coming to leave the Valle de Abdelaziz, I took the advice of the locals. They said, don't ride the Camino, it'll be far too muddy. So I took the surfaced road all around here. I bypassed Antequera and rode the surfaced road all the way to here. So I can't comment on what water is available or wild camping. There is a campsite here, Camping El Torcal. I took a look at it. Looks like they've got a fab restaurant, but I didn't like the campsite. Well, not in March anyway. Perhaps it's better later in the year. I continued on until I had to go on the Camino, and it wasn't too wet by now. There were puddles, but it wasn't too bad at all. And I rode along to here, and then I wild camped just below this large peak here. It was quite windy, but it was fine otherwise. There was no water available, but the next morning I rode back onto the Camino. So eventually you hit a road, and then as you can see there's quite a spaghetti-like junction here. As you get to this road, just on the other side of it is a hotel and restaurant. I rode straight through the tunnel, and then I diverted off down this road into a small hamlet of Villanueva de Cauche. And just as you enter it, on your left is an absolutely fabulous restaurant. It looks closed, but if you just push the door, it opens. There it is, Bar La Peña. On leaving the hamlet, you need to find your way to this surfaced road. It's gently undulating through farmland and hills. When you get here to a tight hairpin, it does get quite steep uphill and continues for some time. I didn't notice any water opportunities or camping opportunities, but that's because I wasn't looking, so I can't really say. While riding this route, this surface road, you need to keep an eye out because you're looking for a right turn in onto a Camino. It's in a pretty random place. There's nothing that I could tell you to look out for. So it's this Camino you want. And what a Camino it is. It's virtually all downhill all the way to Rio Gordo. It can be steepish at times, and it can be rocky at times. I didn't notice any water or camping opportunities. Again, I wasn't looking. I decided to stay in Rio Gordo for one night. I stayed at Hostal Maison. It was €28 and it was bike friendly and very nice indeed. The town has the usual resupply shops. You head out of Rio Gordo back on a Camino. If it's been raining, just be aware that there are some very large puddles right across the road which you can't negotiate, you have to walk through. Now the land is mostly farmed. It's often olive or almond groves. And one thing, when you see these on the map, you think, oh look, there's lots of space for camping. What they tend to do is roughly plough this land, so it's really not possible, unless you don't mind 8-inch bumps in your sleeping area, it's not possible to camp on it, so just bear that in mind. Now this Camino hops on and off a few surfaced roads here and there. You do pass through a couple or more of hamlets, so there'll be some water opportunities there, I expect, and there's quite a lot of corticos along the way if you get desperate. Wild camping, I wasn't looking, but I think you could find somewhere. There's a tricky turn in on this Camino. You've just got off a surfaced road, short way down it, you need to turn left here, and it's just like a muddy track. It really doesn't look like you should be going down there. And then that cuts across to another surfaced road. It's gently undulating. It's not too bad at all. Quite pleasant views. Here is a nice restaurant right on the side of the Camino, worth a visit. And you pass through a small hamlet here, as you do in other places as well. There's some quite nice views along here. You pass through a disused railway tunnel, and then you come to the town of Ventas de Tafaraya. So after the town, you get back onto the route by just going back down the road and turning left, and you're skirting round a single track that's clinging to the edge of this mountain here. Now be careful that you don't continue on like I did. You need to drop down the mountainside, and it's a really overgrown trail. You can barely see it, and you can see it better on here than you could in real. It gets steep, it's overgrown, and it's rocky. And what you're heading for basically is this camino here. And this camino goes through farmland. It's undulating, and it goes on for some time. I didn't see any resupply facilities or water. I personally didn't like this area. It was being intensively farmed. There were seasonal workers about, people about on quads, and I just didn't feel safe there. So I looked for wild camping along here, but there was nowhere I felt safe. And there are corticos dotted about, so there's people. And you're skirting around this national park, and you're just sort of going around the edge of the woodland, and there is a camping spot here, but it's about 4 kilometres uphill off route. So I didn't want to camp there because I really didn't like the area, but there is camping here. So you ride the Camino down here, you eventually hit this road, take the road for a short while, and right here in the middle of nowhere is a hotel, Hotel Rural Los Caños de la Alcaiceria. Now, it's a nice hotel. I can't remember how much, it was around 35 euros. Again, bike friendly, really nice. I enjoyed my time there. They let me wash the bike. There is nothing around here, there's no shops. Up some steps from the hotel car park, there's a chapel just here, and there's quite a lot of ground there, so you may get away with wild camping there. The route continues and it rides through the Sierra de Cazorla, and the Camino is right up the side of the hotel, just here. It's a well-graded gravel Camino riding through hilly farmland. As for water, I think there might have been a stream beyond the hedge along here. And you continue along the Camino. And the Altravesur route takes you all the way into Alhama de Granada. I didn't need to resupply, and I presume that you can there. It's a reasonably big town. So instead of riding all the way in and out, I crossed the reservoir here on a surfaced road and a bit of a bridge. Then you continue down the surfaced road for a while, and then you turn right onto quite a rough Camino, which passes through all sorts of farmland. Quite often it's almond and olive grove. And you continue all the way along. I didn't recall any water or wild camp spots, but that's because I wasn't looking. I think there may be a small section of perhaps surface road. I can't quite remember. And you're heading for the small pueblo of Arenas del Rey. It's a very small town. The shops are limited, but you can get a little bit of resupply there. When you leave Arenas del Rey, you go out on a surface road for a short while, and then you turn right onto a Camino. It's just a sort of grassy, gravelly Camino, and it's passing through many small holdings, and there's lots of the plastic greenhouses along this route. And I lost phone signal down here, and losing phone signal on this tour only happened occasionally in the middle of a big sierra, such as Sierra de Cazorla, Sierra de Cazorla. I lost it. but I did lose it here as well for some reason, and I didn't know where to go. It wasn't clear because it went off in many directions. It went straight ahead, it went down here, it went up there. So I eventually discovered that I needed to turn left here and cross the river. There's a shallow river here, and cross the river and then ride off into more caminos. This part of the route is quite jiggly. You're sort of turning quite often, and the camino is grassy and gravelly up to about here, and then it becomes better graded gravel. And there's a couple of river crossings in this section, a couple more, so there's a couple of water opportunities. And you ride this camino, and at one point it actually becomes surfaced. It's concrete. And then it becomes gravel again, and you reach a plateau. You reach the top of the hill you've been climbing, and you reach this plateau here, and there's what I used to think was an aircraft testing facility, but I think it's actually perhaps just a landing strip. And along here is wooded land, and I wild camped just here with no problem. You return to the camino, and there's a left turn here, but then there's another left turn that is easily missed onto a very narrow camino. It's not as wide as the others. It's not a single track, but it's not a wide camino. And then you come into this area where they've been cutting a lot of fire breaks, and it mashes up the trails, and it's actually quite hard to find where you're going. And what you're looking for is a single track down to Hyena. And what you need to do is sort of go down somewhere near here. There's a tree and there's a GR signpost, and you need to go down there, and then you'll see a signpost, and you take the lower of the single tracks along here towards Hyena. And the single track then actually turns into a double track, and it gets quite steep at one point. And just before you get into Hyena, you will get to a river crossing. So there's another water opportunity. The river crossing is just here. It's only shallow. Hyena has a few shops, so you can do a little resupply here. It has cafes and restaurants. I don't know about accommodation. And you ride out of Hyena on a surfaced road, and it stays surfaced for some time, and then it just turns into a camino where it goes off into a forest, and you ride through this forest, this woodland, for quite some time, and eventually you come out of it. And you've reached the top by now, so you may get a little downhill somewhere around here, and then you ride through some open meadowland along here, and then as a nice surprise, just here, just before you hit the road, there's a tapas bar just here. Very nice. And when you get back onto the road, you take the surface road to the left for a little while, and then you turn right onto the camino here. This camino starts off as a grassy, gravelly camino, and then it turns into a well-surfaced gravel camino, and the views down here are stunning. You're riding down a dry riverbed and gorges. Very, very nice ride. A lot of it is downhill, not all of it. Now the Altravesur route says there's a campsite somewhere near here. I didn't see it at all. And also it says there's plenty of camping in the woodland around here. I didn't notice any water sources, but I presume if there's a campsite that there'll be water. And you continue on this fantastic camino. You're actually going towards Albuñuelas. When you start nearing the town, you need to be very careful on the camino because there's a turn into your left that's quite hidden. It's very easy to carry on the camino down here, and you need to take a left here onto a narrower camino. This is what it looks like from a distance, so it's quite near Albuñuelas. It's somewhere around here, and you've travelled quite a long way. And this is a narrow camino for a while, quite rough, and then it becomes a single track. Now it's gnarly, it's steep, it's twisty, quite good fun. You can ride some of it, I couldn't ride all of it. And then you head off into the town of Albuñuelas. It has a few shops, but not many. It only has a supermarket, a pharmacy and a bread shop. It's got some cafes and bars, and I decided to stay a few days in Albuñuelas at Cazorla, and it's a bed and breakfast run by an Englishman called Ken. It was €25 a night, bike friendly and quite brilliant. I really enjoyed my time there. Out of Albuñuelas, you take a surfaced camino, a very pretty one, and it's downhill all the way to Salares. And then you're going on to Restibal, Melejís, Lecrin, Acequias, and that's all uphill. Now, I lost all my footage from Salares to Acequias, so I've no idea whether there's water or wild camp opportunities there. The only wild camp opportunity I could remember is here, before Acequias. The Camino passes under a highway, and there's enough ground here, I would have thought, to wild camp. I'm sure there will be water. Most towns have a fuente, and I'm sure there must be somewhere between here and here for water, but I can't be sure. You continue on from Acequias up towards Niguelas. Now, I decided to stay in Niguelas, so I turned left here into the town, and I stayed at this hotel, El Secreto de Olivo. It was €50 a night, but it's very nice. It's a boutique hotel, bike friendly. Even though it was posh, they let me put the bike in the room. Niguelas should be okay for a little resupply, and there are bars and cafes. From Niguelas, you get back onto the Camino. You're now onto the Sierra Nevada range. This part's quite steep. Somewhere around here, about 3/4 of an hour up, is a fantastic wild camp spot. I wish I'd known about it, as I'd have made my way there the night before. Nothing unusual about the Camino. It's all very nice. Not much camping possibilities otherwise, because it's a Camino with a drop one side and an incline the other. But as I say, somewhere around here there's a fuente at about, I think it may be 1,500 meters. There's here a fuente that was running. All very nice views. And there's another water opportunity. There's a river valley, so you go down quite a steep double track Camino, and then I got lost here. You need to get on down to the bottom here. Now I took a pathway that said it's not suitable for bikes. I don't know if I was at the right place, but it was very twisty, very steep, single track, a mule trail. and at the bottom is a river and an acequia, so you can get some water. You ride a single track up, then a camino, back onto the camino. And all along here now, you'll find acequias, so there's water opportunities now and again. I was looking for a wild camp spot by now, and there is a recreation area here. I didn't fancy it. I'm sure the braver of you would have found a wild camping spot, but I couldn't, and I didn't fancy the recreation area because it's under very heavy tree canopy and it would be freezing in the morning. So I continued on, and I found a spot just around here. So I turned off the camino to my right, and there's a nave, and it didn't look as though it was being used. So I wild camped just here, and I didn't get disturbed at all. I didn't hear cars, people or anything. There is water available quite close by. There's an acequia. Continuing on the camino, and you need to turn off it, and there's a left turning, and that's here, and that's another narrower camino that then I was told it just goes into overgrown single track, which is quite difficult to negotiate. So I turned back when I realised I was at that spot, and I took the rest of the camino down to the road, and I rode this surface road that runs parallel with the Altravesur all the way to Pampanera, where I got a room in Hostel Pampanera for a couple of nights. Now, Pampanera is a tourist town. There are some food shops, but they're not proper supermarkets. The very basics are available. It's mostly tourist shopping. So I slightly regret staying there. You can get a bus from here up the mountains to the larger towns where you can get to a supermarket, which I did. Leaving Pampanera, you go high above it, through the town, high above it, and you get onto a mule trail. This mule trail is steep, it's rocky, and it's quite difficult to negotiate with 50 kilos of bike and luggage. And then you come to the pueblo of Bubion, a better resupply facility than there is in Pampanera, and bars and restaurants, and obviously a Fuente. But also, if you need anything for your bike, there's Alpujarra bikes. So that is really handy. I got new brake pads fitted there, and they're lovely people, Brian and Lynn, very helpful. Heading off out of Bubion on the surfaced road, which then comes to the pueblo, the slightly larger pueblo of Capiera. Again, it's another touristy town, but it has more resupply facilities. And you head out of Capiera on the surface road, which then becomes an unsurfaced camino. There's an acequia on this camino, so you'll find water. Also, there's a waterfall to your left, which is nice, and a stream, so again, another water source. Now, very strangely, the route is showing it takes a shortcut here. I think I rode around. One thing to be aware of, though, I think here is a rock fall, so you have to go steeply down and steeply up a very slippery face, which was quite hard with the bike. Luckily, there was a hiker available to help me. But I don't recall riding this. So I rode round, I think. Continuing on the Camino, you're above Trevelez. I actually wanted to go to Camping Trevelez, so I got off the route here and rode down to the campsite. One thing that will save you a whole world of pain is knowing that on Google Maps, Camping Trevelez is shown a lot earlier than the entrance, so it shows it as being here. So I was riding up and down this road, it's quite a way, and the entrance is somewhere around here, so I couldn't find it for ages. So just bear that in mind, it's further out of town than it looks. It was around, I think, €25 for 2 nights with electric. They don't have a shop, but they have some provisions, and there's a restaurant, the usual wash-in facilities, laundry facilities. So it was quite nice. If you want to resupply, you can go into the town. They have all the usual facilities. And riding out of Trevelleth, you ride out over the bridge on the surfaced road, and then you take the Camino to your left. Now this again is a mule trail. It's very long. It goes on and on and on. It's not as bad as the Boubion one, but it can be an uphill struggle at times over rocks. On this mule trail there is water available, and there is also a section where you have to ride through a bramble tunnel. It's not very long. The mule trail makes way to Camino. One thing I haven't mentioned about a lot of the Caminos we ride on is that there isn't always shade. And this one in particular, you can be in the blazing sun with clear blue skies, and it gets very hot and you can easily get burnt. Now, you need to be careful on this Camino, because on a descent, which you're kind of enjoying, as we do on bikes, so you're coming down a descent, enjoying it, and you'll go off on the Camino, probably like I did. And what you're looking out for on your right is a single track that goes across, goes parallel with where you're riding, and then it goes down to Jubiles, the next pueblo. So just be aware that there is a hidden single track. It's a nice bit of single track, a bit overgrown for my liking because I've got fork bags, but it was pretty good fun. And you'll come down to the pueblo of Jubiles. I don't know if Jubiles has any shops, but it does have restaurants, and I don't know about accommodation. So you hit the surfaced road here, and you ride that for a short while, and then you want to go off onto the Camino here, and this is above the town of Berchules. Now, I was meeting a friend in Alcutar, and I stayed there for a month. So I rode this mountain road and stayed in Alcutar picking peas. But you'll want to ride up here, so I can't comment on that. I presume there'll be water opportunities, but I don't know. If you wanted to resupply here, you'll find some shops in Berchules. Also, there's some accommodation available. I didn't want to return down the mountain to rejoin the trail, so I skipped this section and I rode down towards Messina Bomberon, and I took this Camino up here, and I rejoined the Altravesur here. And just after this junction was a Fuente, but the Fuente was dry. But you will find one a little further along the trail that is hopefully running. I was dreading this section, being out of civilization for a long time, but in actual fact, if you're a decent rider, you could do this in a day. I took 2 days, camping somewhere around here or here, but I could have done it in a day, and I'm a very, very slow rider, so it's not as bad as it looks. There's water available. As I said, there's a Fuente, then you'll come across a waterfall with picnic area. There are some springs with water just coming out of the ground on the side of the Camino. There's one dry section, so I'd advise you to keep your water topped up when the opportunity arises. I think it could be this area. There was no water unless you climbed down a steep embankment to a river. But then after that, around here, the springs start again, water coming out of the side of the mountain. If I hadn't have got lost, I'd have probably gone over to the other side of the mountains that day. but I did get lost, and what you need to be looking out for is a hidden turning. The Camino continues down here, but you need to go to the left. It forks to the left, it's up a slight incline, and it's also fenced off with a barrier, some sort of barrier, a chain or something, and it looks like you shouldn't go up there. But that is the Altravesur route. So a fork left here. I wild camped just here. It was sheltered from the wind. There was a lot of wind up there, and it was great. But there is no water close by here. From here, you're crossing over to the north side of the Sierra Nevada on the Camino, and then you come out here at Puerto de la Ragua. There is some sort of recreation area here, but the cafe that I presume is there was closed when I went in March or April by then. And you continue along the surfaced road here, and what you're looking out for is a gap in the crash barrier just here, and you turn right onto a single track. This single track is rocky, it's gnarly, it's overgrown in places. They're also cutting some fire breaks, so it's hard to see where the trail goes, but it's good fun. Lower down, where it's overgrown, there's brambles and nettles, but you can get through there. I did have an accident though in the brambles and nettles and fell down an embankment. There's water down some of the embankments. There's a stream. You also cross a little stream for a short while somewhere around here, and then you ride off eventually onto a surfaced road, and there's actually a puente somewhere here, and you enter the pueblo of Ferreira. Now, it was siesta time when I arrived and there wasn't much happening. I don't know what facilities are available. So I rode on through a very barren piece of land here, all the way into La Calahorra. And I didn't take this piece of Camino. I stayed on the surfaced road. Because I'd fallen off and I'd banged my head and I was muddy and all my gear was muddy, I decided to stay in La Calahorra for a couple of nights. I stayed at Rosabel Hostel. It was €40 a night. They've got a fantastic restaurant. You can resupply in the town, and also there's a fabulous landmark of a castle, which I believe is open only on Wednesday mornings or afternoons. I'm not sure which. Leaving La Calahorra, you need to cross the Marquesado Plateau, which is here. It's a flat piece of land between the Sierra Nevada and the Sierra de Cazorla. It's not a very interesting ride. It's mainly farmland. There are a few corticos scattered about, so you may be able to get water from one of those, but I didn't see any other water opportunities. As for wild camping, I wouldn't want to camp on it. It's not very pretty. But there was a ruin sometime after the solar farm. There was a ruin, but it may be here. Yeah, so this is a ruin. You could camp behind it or inside it, but there is a farm opposite. I did get chased by 4 dogs at one point when I rode by a farm, which was a bit scary. Towards the end of the crossing, the ground becomes very silty, so you can't really ride it, and that gives way to a dry riverbed, a very rocky one. It was hard to negotiate. I'm really not sure I was in the right place at all, even though the GPS showed I was. You head into this lovely pueblo of Charches. I didn't notice any shops, but I stopped off at a cafe bar on the way. They were very friendly, had a couple of cokes, and they brought out tapas. Very nice. And then you head out of Charches straight onto the Camino here. And the first section of Sierra de Cazorla, it's quite barren. There's an incline up to your left with some sparse trees, and one down to your right with sparse trees, and just a very well gravel surfaced Camino. I didn't spot any wild camp places, and certainly I don't remember any water opportunities. It gets nicer as you ride into it. The trees, the woodland becomes thicker, and it gets more and more enjoyable. A couple of hours riding into it, you actually come across a building on your right, which is here. There's water to your left. There's gates just here which were unlocked. It's some sort of outdoor refuge, but possibly for scouts and guides or something, because it is locked. But the gates were undone, so I went in, and this is a wonderful covered terrace. So I'm sure you could wild camp under here. There are fuentes and tables and chairs in the grounds. I think you could probably camp there. I noticed there is some sort of building here, though. I'm not sure what it is. So that's a good water and wild camp opportunity. And you continue along the Camino. The Sierra de Cazorla is well signposted, and the further I got in, the more and more I enjoyed it. I came across some signposts that pointed to a refugio, but I never found it. I'm sure if you can navigate better than me that you would find it. So somewhere before the refugio I went to, there is apparently a refugio. About halfway along the Sierra de Cazorla, what you need to be looking out for is where a single track forks off to the left and the Camino goes straight on. I actually missed this turning. And you ride this single track. It's very steep in places and very gnarly in places. And you ride down the single track until you hit a Camino. And then here is a recreation area with picnic tables, chairs, and a couple of fuentes. The water does need filtering. And just here is a refugio Alto Canaleja. I couldn't see how to open it, so I wild camped just behind the building here, and that was fine. Then you return to the Camino. Now I missed this turn in here, back onto this Camino. So I stayed on this one until I met back up with it here. I don't recall any other water opportunities, but the Sierra de Cazorla, once it gets wooded, especially down here, you probably could find some wild camping spots because it's open woodland rather than raised Camino. But it's quite a fantastic ride. The Camino then turns to single track, and the single track just goes on, and it was quite fantastic. It keeps crossing a dry riverbed. It was my favourite part of the ride. At one point the single track passes through an abandoned farm. I think there may have been water. I think there may have been a tank or something here, but I didn't use it. You could probably wild camp anywhere around here because the land is flat. There was a barn that was empty, probably camp in there. And there's a small Camino leading out of it, but you want to cross this Camino and go back onto the single track here. And that's the GR7, it is signposted. And this is fabulous, it just keeps crossing this riverbed. But then unfortunately comes to an abrupt end. This part of the route I couldn't work out. There was a gate here. I went through the gate. I rode along the side of the olive grove here, but I couldn't see a route down here, so I went into the dry riverbed. There's a trail leads into the dry riverbed, and I rode it a short distance and then got out here. And then the single track becomes a camino into farmland and then into Batha itself. There is a water opportunity just before you get into Batha itself. Here's the water opportunity, and then I stopped just as I entered Batha at a fantastic bar. I can't see it on here. It's Bar Urbano, very welcoming, and I stayed there for quite some time. And then I found somewhere to stay, Hostal Casa Grande. It's run by a mountain biker, so it's very bike friendly, and the room was great. And it was around €27, so very good value, with a terrace. Batha is the largest town I came across so far. There were several bike shops, all the usual resupply facilities, cafes, bars, etc. One thing to bear in mind about staying in hostels is that they usually have 1 day a week they're closed, and I seem to turn up at them, and one of the days I was there they would be closed, which they'd still house you, but there was no food available. So you do need to bear that in mind, but you can always find food elsewhere. Riding out, you go through the town centre, you pass a cemetery, and then it becomes a camino. As with the Altravesur, we're trying to stay off the surfaced roads, and we're heading for this pueblo of Zuja. Now, if for any reason you wasn't feeling too well, you could just go on the road here to Zuja. This is quite a way out and quite hilly. Great views across the plateau, absolutely fantastic. I stopped off in Zuja. I wouldn't recommend the first bar you get to. She was really grumpy. I think it was Cafe Bar Toro. But if you ride into the village, there's lots and lots more opportunities to get something to eat or drink. And I presume there's resupply facilities as well. And you ride out of the town on a camino. And when I say camino, what I'm meaning is it's a gravel road or it's a very narrow concrete road. You can see the Embalse de Negretan in the distance. You ride along it. I stopped on my way at this restaurant bar, had a Coca-Cola right on the water's edge, looking down at a thermal bath. It was very nice. And then you ride along, and you're riding by the side of a narrow canal, and it looks like it's where the water is taken from the reservoir. And you ride along that side that canal for quite some time, so there's plenty of water opportunities. And then the terrain changes, and you have to cross this, again, a very barren piece of farmland. The only thing growing is that planted by man. Not very interesting. I didn't notice any water opportunities. Eventually you hit a surfaced road and take that surfaced road through a town called Benomorel. I stopped off there at a restaurant and stayed there for a while, had something to eat. They provide tapas with the drinks. And then you've got a long road section. It's a surfaced road and it goes through farmland. Sometimes it's barren and desolate, chalky hills, very desert-like. You eventually come to a small town called, I think it was Cortes de Batha. I don't know about resupply facilities, but I presume there's some shops. I stopped off at a restaurant for a Coke. Now, you don't continue on through this town. You need to turn left and then left again, and then you're back out on the surface road through the barren lands, very little shade. And I think you continue on this for something like 40 kilometres. I was actually heading for a campsite a little further on, but I decided to stop because I really was suffering from the heat. I'd been going 12 hours. I stopped in Campo Camera. When you enter Campo Camera, you'll see a large sign saying hotel and a phone number. I called it and they said they're closed. So I decided to ride into the town, and I asked someone and they said go to Casa Pepe. It's a fabulous bar and restaurant, and they actually run this very same hotel that I'd phoned, and they said it was closed. Later he came to me to tell me that I could stay there if I really wanted to, but there's no hot water because they only turn the hot water on when there's bookings. So I stayed there for the night, and it really is fantastic. They're very welcoming. Really enjoyed my time there. When you leave Campo Camera, you rejoin the surfaced road you was on before, and you cross the barren land still, but it does become greener and greener, eventually making way into a fantastic descent through forested land. It was really enjoyable. And this is the campsite I was heading for, camp in Sierra de Cazorla. And I stopped off here. There's a restaurant on the water's side and had a Coke, and then continued on the surface road. And eventually, to get into the Sierra de Cazorla, you turn right into the park. And it looks like there's actually a hotel or cabins here, so there is accommodation, and also obviously the campsite. And you get straight onto the Camino. Some of it's fenced off, so wild camping might be a little difficult. You'll ride past some sort of tourist centre and a hotel, and soon the fences disappear and the Camino gives way to single track, quite rocky, and eventually you find yourself crossing meadows. And so the wild camp opportunities are there, and you find yourself riding alongside the embalsa, and eventually you cross it, continuing to ride along the single track across meadows. So lots of opportunities for wild camping. The single track becomes Camino again, but it's a very rough Camino. It's not a gravel graded Camino. It's quite rough in places. It can be grassy. Crossing all sorts of open land, so again, wild camping opportunities. Eventually you get to the highest point and you have a rather nice descent all the way down to a river valley where there's a water opportunity because you're crossing the river. It's only shallow. It may be somewhere around here. I can't find it on the map. And then you continue to ride alongside this river for quite some time. You can see the river runs here, and you're riding alongside it for quite a while, so there's plenty of water opportunities. The Camino then leaves the river valley here, and you'll start climbing up, and you'll get to a junction. If you want to go to the Refugio Fuente Acero, that is here. So at this junction you turn left for a short way, and there is a Refugio. It was unlocked, and the Fuente for it, there is a signpost. You need to walk somewhere up here for the water, but it's very nice. I wild camped just outside the front here and wasn't disturbed. So heading back onto a nicely graded gravel Camino, heading through here, through some beautiful woodland. Not really many wild camp opportunities because you are on a mountainside most of the time. So you pass through a gate, and the land then becomes less and less wooded and more barren, and then you get out into the very dry area. And around 11 kilometres from the last refugio, you find the Refugio Rambla Seca, which has a water pump inside it, but also just here, just outside it, is or was some water troughs and running puente. And continuing on through this barren land, it's a roughly graded camino. Sometimes it smooths out, but most of the time it's quite stony and rocky. Around 11 kilometres on, you'll pass another refugio. You have to turn off left here. It's not actually called Refugio de Canet de Rincon. It's called Refugio Forestal, so I'm unsure where that name came from. Again, there is a water pump inside, so here's a water opportunity as wild camping as well, or staying inside there. And all of this is quite open. There's the odd fence or two. You could wild camp there, I'm sure. There's a few trees, not many. And you continue on again, and just make sure to look out for turnings. This turning I think I missed and was quite a push up back. And the land is undulating, it's up and down and up and down, very little shade. Keep an eye out for junctions. And 11 kilometres after the last refugio is another one, Refugio Campo de El Espino. I didn't go inside this one, so I don't know if there is water, but I can only assume that there is. And somewhere along here there was a small copse, and just beyond that is where I crashed my bike, somewhere around here I believe, perhaps somewhere on this road here. So that's all I can tell you, folks.
So that was my Altravesur ride. I hope this film is useful to both experienced bikepackers that are going to do the Altravesur route, and also to newbies that are perhaps just starting out on their bikepacking adventures. This was my first bikepacking tour, and I learned a lot from it. And I hope you learn a little from this film. I hope it's helpful to you. So I'll wind this episode up here, and hopefully you'll be seeing me soon. Bye bye for now.
Le cha-cha-cha d'origine cubaine est un mambo que l'on joue sur un rythme lent. Nous commençons par l'étude du pas de base, le va-et-vient. Le va-et-vient.
Apprenons le cha-cha-cha. Apprenons le cha-cha-cha. Le cha-cha-cha. Le cha-cha-cha. Le cha-cha-cha. Le cha-cha-cha. Apprenons le cha-cha-cha. Apprenons le cha-cha-cha.
Nous commençons par l'étude du pas de base,